Hi and welcome on behalf of Medscape. I have the pleasure today of talking with Dr. Indu Subramanian, who is director of the Southwest PADRECC Center at the VA in Los Angeles, as well as a clinical professor at UCLA. We will be talking today about the impact of heat waves and natural disasters on neurologic disease, specifically neurodegenerative illness. As at the time of the recording today, we're about 1 week after the news of the fires in LA hit us. And of course, Indu, you are in the middle of LA. So do you want to fill us in a little bit how the situation looks for you?
I hate saying the word unprecedented because this is what we constantly say this, right, with the pandemic and stuff. But these are times like I've never lived in. There's people who lost their homes literally overnight, who are colleagues of mine, who are now, trying to figure out how to balance, trying to find new schools for their children and rebuilding, a life with nothing, but a small bag that they grabbed, in an urgent situation. So obviously, very stressful. People who've lost everything as well, and other parts of town who are, already kind of marginalized folks, in neighborhoods that are historically Black, historically, not without a lot of resources. In the beauty of it all, I guess the city has come together to try to work together. I am currently safe. I'm, prepared to evacuate with my family. We continue to try to work as physicians and try to support our communities and try to do our best to figure out how to move forward. But it's very traumatic, very sort of constantly changing and stressful. And I say this from the vantage point of somebody who's still in my home and still safe with my family and not in imminent danger. So it's been kind of crazy. But you're right, Kathrin. We just wrote this paper that came out on heat waves, and I've just become so much more attuned to the effects of climate change on our society. And as physicians, I don't think that we really thought about this going through med school, but just the impact of the ever increasing toxins that are in the air, the ever increasing, risks to our patients who are really on the fringe often of healthcare and of society, sometimes with, very lonely, isolated individuals that we take care of, and really sort of thinking about how we can provide care and prevent bad things from happening to patients at risk for neurodegenerative disease or already have neurodegenerative disease like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. But in the global picture, even thinking about brain health and some of the work that we've done, thinking about, lifestyle and how we can, help our brains to be better in the long run and preserve brain function. I think, the effects of climate change, air pollution, and, heat waves, these wildfire particulate matter exposures are very scary. Some of the models in animal models and also in data that we're getting they're quite new on the effects of some of this on populations and the risk for diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm really happy to hear that you and your family are safe, and realizing this is very, very difficult to with the uncertainties and dealing with many people affected directly by these fires. So as you mentioned, there's been a number of papers just in these past couple of years mentioned or studying the effects on natural disasters and especially wildfires on even the incidence of neurologic disorders and especially dementia. Do you want to tell a little bit more about some of these findings?
As we speak, there's, urban fires that are happening. The city of the Pacific Palisades has homes with a lot of different mixes of chemicals and toxins that are burning from, electronics, computers, batteries. Historically, we've had data on, wildfires with trees, different kinds of trees, eucalyptus, pine, needles, burning in forests and the risk of that. But, what becomes ever increasingly concerning in not just this sort of modeling of, what happens when houses burn and people are exposed to this, but also I think in day-to-day life in many parts of the world, people are burning their trash regularly. In parts of Asia, I just got back from India, and part of the way they remove garbage is burning whatever happens to be there, and includes a lot of plastics. These are not just in my backyard LA concerns. I also work at the VA, with the concerns about burn pits and exposures there. I think we have mixed materials in military bases and people being exposed exposed to these sorts of things. So I think, as we're starting to understand toxins like trichloroethylene, paraquat, and things are very foundational for what is being thought to be a man-made disease of sorts with Parkinson's disease. But then, we look at also Alzheimer's disease, and there was a study that just came out this past year of the Kaiser Permanente cohort of over 1 million patients. Records looked at and exposure to different sizes of particulate matter. And what they found was that in wildfire exposure, which has a certain density of particulate matter that's very small, actually, in wildfires, these particulate matter tend to be produced very quickly at very high temperatures with a very interesting mix of toxins. These particles are very, very small, so small, in fact, that they're not usually filtered by the nasal epithelium, and they have a potential way to go right into the brain through the olfactory bulb. In this cohort of patients that was followed, there was a 21% increase in dementia risk per, I believe it was 1 microgram per meter cubed, which is the way that you measure this particulate matter below the size of 2.5. And that was higher from wildfires than what was seen in the similar particulate matter exposure from other sorts of air pollution, which is already concerning. That was like 3% increased risk. So starting to get data on this and starting to really think about, how does this affect all of us with the growing numbers of patients who are getting Alzheimer's disease, and certainly there is the potential link, there also with increased risk of Parkinson's disease in some of these sort of patients, and as well in firemen actually that are exposed to fires and things like that.
And we've become increasingly aware, as you mentioned, of the impact of pesticides, but really just all around dangerous chemicals. The list is sort of increasing. With that in mind, do you have any tips for people acutely affected by these fires of potentially how they can protect themselves?
Yes, I mean, I think, having a way to track air quality, and, there's apps now, and we're constantly being, bombarded by so much information about the winds and the air quality. So I think having a way to track air quality and staying indoors, if the warnings are higher, if you already have, cardiopulmonary disease, definitely being much more vigilant because it can set off things like asthma attacks and things like that. In terms of folks that can stay home, staying indoors, keeping the windows and doors closed. If you go out wearing masks, if you can wear an N95 or K95 mask, those have been, sort of recommended. Additionally, not trying to generate more air pollution, so not burning, extra things or using leaf blowers, burning candles or other things in your own home while the air quality might not be good. There's also been thoughts to, perhaps get a filter, a HEPA filter if you can, or I've seen, even some using a box fan and putting a filter in, sort of doing a DIY kind of version. But if you can, do this, even possibly running the air conditioning, which has a HEPA filter, as part of the system, I understand, maybe another way. If you're in a place near the fire, if you can get away, certainly from direct exposure, and certainly not trying to go back and go through things until it's perfectly safe, and using the right facial covering, and even these particulates can get onto your clothes, into your skin. You can breathe them, you can eat them, even if you're eating food in these sort of environments. So just being very, very mindful, especially in these next few days where the winds are picking up and things are increasingly at risk. So these are some practical tips. Obviously, some of these tips are things that may not be practical for some of our patients who, I already worry about, sort of them not being connected digitally. Many of them are isolated. Some of the folks that we've heard have actually died from, the fires, are actually people who could not evacuate, were not maybe able to quickly mobilize. And so much of this, is really relying on digital systems, which rely on smartphones and internet access, which many folks don't have.
I do want to switch over a bit to your recent article that you just published with Dr. Saad in JAMA Neurology on the impact of heat waves. So, of course, we mostly talked about the fires today, but just for general, as you mentioned earlier, with climate change and just extreme weather conditions becoming more common, especially heat waves, having also very negative effects. You want to just talk about a bit more in general how to prepare and probably protect ourselves and vulnerable patients, especially from these issues.
There's not a lot of data, interestingly. If you want to have a niche that you can, fill and feel hopefully fulfilled in some ways, with some very cool people. I think, you and I are in integrative medicine, and we want to understand, what are the modifiable risk factors that we can help people to live better with these diseases. I think air pollution and even, your zip code can really define how, your outcome. And I think Ray Dorsey had said that, if you want to really change the burden of disease in general in the world, focus on air pollution. It's a greater thing to sort of be impactful than, for example, hypertension or hyperglycemia, which is what a lot of us in medicine sort of tend to focus on. So I think, low hanging fruit to hopefully make a difference. I think there's been some studies. For example, there was a study looking at, rates of admissions and mortality in a part of the world where the temperature had just gone 1 degree over threshold of 34 degrees Celsius or 93 degrees Fahrenheit, and it increased the admissions and mortality in Parkinson's disease by like 10% just with that small change. And so, these are sometimes not huge changes, and there are parts of the world certainly that live all year round in heat. It's really this change where somebody is living at a temperature, not expecting a sudden boost in heat, and then are dealing with the acute consequences of the acute change in heat and is not prepared. What ends up happening sometimes is that our patients are on medications where they may not sense that they are dehydrated. Sometimes they have dysautonomia. They may be on things like anticholinergic medicines that may sort of change their ability to regulate heat. And then, with Parkinson's disease, needing to be mobile to get your medications, to be able to get water, to get supplies, to get out of your home, puts you at increased risk. Many of you know that I spend time talking about loneliness, and I was fascinated by a book called Project Unlonely, where they talked about who dies in a heat wave. And it turns out that the people who die in a heat wave are the following. Number one, people who are old. Number two, people who are sick. Number three, people who might have had trauma. Number four, people who are already marginalized in some way, be it racially or economically. And number five is actually folks that are on kind of the wrong side of the digital divide. So people who, may not have access, to all the information and alerts and things like that. And when I think about it, that's like all of my patients, so many of us have these patients in our offices and clinics, and these are the folks that are at the highest risk for becoming isolated and lonely and not having touch points to really help save them. And so I think we as neurologists may know, a handful of those patients in each of our practices. And so perhaps keeping, a list of those phone numbers to really try to check in. Hey, Mr. Smith, there's a heat wave coming our way or a fire coming your way. Are you okay? Do you have a way to, get to somewhere or get some, emergency supplies or stay indoors? And so is there a way that we can kind of protect our populations at risk with neurodegenerative disease in these timeframes? So we kind of outline this in the paper, put some practical suggestions, so ways to think about preparing in advance. And then setting, like, for example, setting alerts when, the temperature goes above a certain amount or the air quality changes a certain amount, preparing perhaps the week ahead, storing food, storing water, maintaining a clean water supply, preparing the day ahead, making sure that your energies, your air conditioning is going to be working, or you know where a cooling center may be it at a mall or somewhere in your city, where would be the place that you would evacuate to. And then the day of, just making sure that you're not going out in the sun, you're sort of staying indoors, you're staying in contact with close friends and family, someone's checking on you, making sure that if you start to feel lightheaded or dizzy, you have a way to alert folks, and that you have access to your medicine, which is huge. I mean, I think that, I was standing in the pharmacy the other day and people are coming in just to get basic medicines and supplies. And unfortunately, we as doctors don't have an easy way to know who needs those backup supplies. And the pharmacists are really overwhelmed. So, again, these emergency stocks of medicines and things like that.
I really like the suggestion of checking in on vulnerable patients. It reminds me of actually the early days of the COVID pandemic, because at the time, the social worker in our clinic, actually in Chicago, did that. And so I think that's an excellent suggestion. I want to really appreciate for your time you taken out of this very, very stressful week you are going through acutely. A lot of these solutions, as we talked about, are really on a political and societal level. And some thought leaders here with, you mentioned Dr. Ray Dorsey and Dr. Michael Oken are sort of leading the way and hopefully making some positive changes. So, with that being said, I really thank you for taking the time today, and wish you, your family, and everyone affected here by the fires in LA all the best.
Yeah, just 2 points. I think, we as clinicians, we are, obviously part of the frontline workforce and shouting out all of us, but, take time for yourself, take time for your family. This is a trauma that we're all living through, and I think we are not processing this in real time. And just, we're also supporting, even if we haven't been directly affected, trying to support each other emotionally and physically on the ground. So I think that's important. Number two, I think, I just want to shout out those frontline, workers like the fire fighters who are flying in from all over. And, the occupational risk for some of these frontline workers, like the folks in 9/11, like the folks that are, here on the ground in LA, sleeping in tents next to these fires, trying to help us, put them out. It's amazing, but it's also, quite scary to think about the long-term exposures, in these folks as well. So really shouting them out for their heroism and bravery. And thank you to Medscape for allowing us to highlight this important topic.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's acute and longer impacts, and people really need to be monitored for sequelae. And with that, we wish everyone all the best in the days and weeks to come. Thank you.